None for me.
Yeah, no changes.
Okay, then the motion passes to approve the minutes for June. Any announcements?
This is Brooke Bell. I have no announcements.
Any from committee members? Nothing?
Nope.
All right, then we'll move on to our agenda items, which we have 4A, the Aurora Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan. That will be
Good
Mr. John.
morning. So this presentation is about the Emerald Ash Borer Management Plan. Some of you it may be a review for some of you. It may be new for some of you. So let's just begin with what is Emerald Ash Borer? So if we can go to the next slide. So this is an insect that was introduced into the United States in 2002. At the bottom of the screen, you can kind of see its progression, mostly where it started and then when it entered into Colorado. So you can see that it started in 2002 in Michigan. They had a hard time figuring out what was going on, but they determined that the insect came in from shipping crates. And it started this very bad situation in the United States. In Asia, this is not a problem insect, but when it arrived here, our trees were not equipped to handle it. So it does feed on all species of North American ash trees. It's an invasive insect. It's metallic green and very beautiful. It's unfortunate it's such a bad insect because it's very beautiful, but it's a flat-headed borer that actually enters into the tree, feeds on the tissues that are alive and creating new tissues for the tree. And that's the reason that it does kill the tree. The spread is primarily through firewood. And it's responsible for the loss of millions of ash trees across the United States. This is the actual worst case of an insect infestation in the United States in history. Its damage is close to 100% fatal, and the only reason it's not 100% fatal is because we do have some ability to treat for it. In Boulder, Colorado, when they found the insect in 2013. They since then have spent around $2 million in this whole thing of trying to manage it. You can see that it went to Longmont 3 years after it entered Boulder, Colorado. And finally, this year, we got information that it was detected in Arapahoe County, basically Littleton, Colorado. One of the reasons that that's so significant is because we have Dad's landfill in Aurora. So everybody is going to be in this region will be moving their infested materials to Dad's landfill, so right through Aurora. So it could be here now. We haven't detected it yet. Could be here now, but just know that there will be much more increased rate of insects entering into our area. So next slide. So this is just a quick progression for you of what happens when EAB enters an area. So in Toledo, Ohio in 2006, that insect entered in. The trees were full, beautiful, thriving. And 3 years later, they were completely dead. You can see that that completely devastated that street. Next slide. So we did work with a consulting firm that helped us to determine how many trees in Aurora we might have. This number, the top bullet point, total ash trees estimated in Aurora, close to 111,000. That is basically all the trees in Aurora, the public and the private. On our public property, we have around 6,000. And we just want to reiterate here that if no action is taken, we will lose all of them. The value of these trees, the iTree eco-structural value, basically, that's a fancy word for the appraised value of these trees, is about $155.2 million. So it's a huge loss for the city if we do nothing. And the annual environmental loss, this is an annual loss, if we lose all of these trees, we will lose an annual benefits loss of $163,000. Basically, with these trees, we are taking carbon sequestration. That's 45% of what these trees do. That basically is them taking carbon dioxide out of the air and photosynthesizing it and producing oxygen for you and I. And then we'll also lose the benefits for pollution removal and the avoided stormwater runoff. Trees play a huge part in stormwater runoff. So these are the benefits that we would lose. Next slide. So we got management recommendations from our consultant, and we decided that we would like to go with the urban SLAM method, which basically is the slow ash mortality. Basically, what this means is that we would be treating certain populations of the trees there's going to be two different ways that we'll be treating this. One will be trees that will be forever treated, and we'll maintain and preserve those. Then there will be other trees that we'll treat for a certain time period. And then those trees will be taken off that treatment methodology. They'll be removed as the insect infests. And then we will be, of course, replanting. The whole idea behind this is that it will help us to be able to manage the pest a little bit better, because this pest, as you'll see in the next slide, it comes in, it's slow at the very beginning, but then within a very short period of time, you get a huge mortality. And so the whole idea behind the urban SLAM is that you will slow down the decline of these trees so that we can manage them in a better way. And when I'm talking about this method, I'm talking about the public trees. Keep that in mind. But we will preserve significant trees. The lesser value trees will treat a little, for a certain period of time. Those will be removed. The lowest value trees will be removed, and we will replace them. And really the replacement piece of it is where most of the cost comes from. So we will replant in these areas where we are going to be losing some of our urban canopy. Next slide. Keeping in mind, I was talking about the public trees, but this is a community-wide problem. It does not just affect the public trees that are out there, it will affect private properties. And as you can see in this slide here, there's a big gap in that 60 million to 93 million to replace both these, treat, remove, replace both public and private ash trees. The biggest part of that gap is related to planting. Will everyone plant trees? If they do, we'll hit that 93 million mark. If we replace our trees, some of the trees in the private sector are replaced, then that means it's going to be around that 60 million. It's not a cheap endeavor. Current funding is not sufficient for this whole program. And there are grants available, but they're insignificant and they really don't make a dent in anything. So one of the things that we were considering is adding an additional full-time inspector so that we can keep an eye out for the insect and figure out where it's moving to once it arrives. And then there's this other issue of the wood utilization marshaling yard. That's where it's a collecting point where we would take the wood and we could use it. There are some groups that will come in and utilize that wood. But it would be basically a collection point that takes people monitoring and making sure that people are not adding things they shouldn't to these sites and things of that nature. Next slide. So this is kind of showing you the how, if there's no treatment, what happens and how quickly these trees die. So it's an inverted relationship, and I'll kind of explain that. You can see in the bottom part, the ash mortality. It starts out a little bit slow, but then by year 7, you're really rising and you're losing a lot of trees all at once. If you do your treatment methods, like we want to do with the urban slam method, you'll see that it kind of cuts it off so that you're not losing as many trees as quick, so that we have time to manage those issues. So keeping in mind, if we don't treat with pesticides, all trees will die. The trees that we do treat and we want to preserve for their lifetime will have to be treated for the lifetime of the tree. And the EAB populations expand exponentially. And when left untreated, you lose them all. In the Midwest, they're losing them by 10 years. Here, they're seeing it might go a little bit faster. So what the next few things I'm going to show you is what will happen to our public trees if we may have no action. So next slide. In year 1, we'll lose 50 trees. Next. In year 2, we'll lose an additional 100 trees. Next slide. The next year, 235 additional. Continue. Year 9, we'll lose 1,700 in that year, in addition to the ones we've already lost. Next slide. And then finally, we'll lose everything by year 12. And this, we might even be a little more accelerated than this. This is the Midwest look at things. And so we just want you to know it's a very quick death curve, and we'll lose all of the trees that we have in our public sector that are ash trees. Next slide. So our immediate action for our pre-detection stage is that we would like to do an educational plan to market to the community so that they understand what this insect means to them, that we can talk through what our plan is for our public trees, that we can work with these different groups so everyone has an understanding of how important it is to be watching for the insect and be doing some management for that. Second, we would like to evaluate our staffing and contractor needs for tree planting. Third, a 1-for-1 removal and replacement of poor condition trees in our parks, and following that, 1-for-1 removal, replanting for poor condition trees on our streets. And then the 5th is to treat our high value trees, which will become about a $70,000 annual ticket. Next slide. So these are the aspects of ash tree management. So first, we're going to detect the insect, look for it. We're going to monitor once we get it, once it arrives. We would like to have community engagement so that everyone's on the same page. We want to do some treatments. Of course, there will be removals. And our big push will be planting, because we don't want to lose our urban canopy. And then finally, disposal and wood utilization. And next slide. And this is the consequence of inaction. If we do nothing, all these trees will die quickly. They will become brittle and they will break easily. They have proven that in the Midwest. They will fall and break during high winds and snow loads. There's been injuries to people. There's damage to property for sure in these situations. So that's our consequence of inaction. And next slide. And that's our EAB presentation, and I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Jackie, for that presentation. Councilmember Murillo, do you have any questions?
No questions. Just happy to see that we're trying to be proactive. And yeah, it would be such a big loss for, I think, a lot of reasons that you mentioned ecologically, from a quality of life standpoint, if we were to lose, these trees en masse. I was out in the mountains and saw the pine beetle damage, and like the just having flashes of, just whole bare forests, and what that would look like in the city makes me really sad. So, really happy to see that we're being proactive, and you have my full support, and trying to mitigate this potential damage.
Thank you.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina, and thank you, Jackie, for your presentation. So you mentioned that there is grant funding available, but it's inadequate. I'd like to know, is that state or federal, some combination thereof?
There is some state and federal, and we're trying right now to utilize some grants that are available in that realm. We haven't heard back from those, but yes.
Okay. Do you have a ballpark of how much would be available for the city if we were successful?
Adrian, can you help me out here?
The state source, which is the one that we're planning on applying for this fall, provides up to 300,000, I believe. And what we want to apply for is actually a strategic urban forestry master plan that includes a lot of inventory of areas throughout the city that aren't inventoried right now. So the bulk of that 300,000 would be used just to gather the information that we would need to effectively manage our urban forest. So that's really the largest pot of money that's relevant to this right now.
Okay. So if I'm understanding you correctly, that grant that you're discussing requires a forestry master plan. So we would be utilizing the bulk of that grant, should we get it, to create that plan. So it doesn't leave as much to actually do the treatment on the trees, correct?
That is correct. Currently, forestry is actually in a pretty good funding place. So we are confident that through our community trees program, we can get this started and make significant progress on our part of the equation.
Okay.
So that's why this is a information only presentation.
I appreciate that. And then I guess on the federal grants, I'd like to know what that landscape looks like, especially given that this isn't just a Colorado issue. Because I wonder if we have opportunity there to utilize FISR to lobby, our Colorado delegation, obviously Congressman Crow's office, but the rest of our delegation, if we're able to see if we can build some bipartisan consensus on that issue. It's impacting. I think Toledo was the example you gave us there, right? So,
Mhm.
Hi.
Yes.
So I have contacts with the USDA, and I'll keep my ears out for any opportunities like that. There's nothing targeted specifically for EAB as far as I know, but I'm also in contact with the grants team with the city to help us, research and keep our ears out for any opportunities.
Yeah. So is that something that we could also then refer over to FISR so that they can discuss to see if it's worthy of adding it to the city's priorities for lobbying with Congressman Crow? Because I understand that there might not be anything existing, but I think that if we can start a conversation, that'd be beneficial. So.
I have no comment there because I
think that's probably more for as our legal representative for this committee, or maybe for city management.
Councilmember Marcano, I can coordinate with Liz Rogers and we can get it added to the information presented to FISR for further conversation by council.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
That it, Councilmember Marcano?
Yep, that's all from me. Thank you.
All right. Any question from you, Councilmember Bergen?
I was going to ask the exact same questions that Councilmember Marcano asked, but
In addition to the FISR committee and lobbying our congressional delegation for monies, I would also, as a representative on Accelerate, we always have the once a year trip. We also can add that to that agenda. And so you've got it coming from two different directions to get ask for some federal dollars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, my only question is there anything that we as residents, community members can do to help, look or see if it's starting to infest in a particular neighborhood?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we want to do with that educational plan is to teach people how to look for it. And so that's really one thing we definitely want to get done is to market this out so we can teach about this insect and how to look for it, what to do if they see something and that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the presentation and the information, and we'll look forward to seeing what we can do to help stop it before it gets out.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, move on to the next presentation, which will be 4B, the Inspiration Trail Connector Update, and that will be Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina. I'm sure you've all been receiving quite a few emails on this particular subject. It's been a long time in the making in terms of trying to make that connection happen. In your backup, obviously, you also have the information. So, we tried to, well, staff came up with a great route, which was the shortest, less expensive route. And it involved, and it's called the Inspiration Trail because it goes through Creekside. It would connect through Creekside to the Inspiration neighborhood. The Creekside Homeowners Association board denied us the access for an easement that we needed that they own. And that was basically the denial for it that led staff to have to look for an alternative route, which the second route will go, through city right-of-ways. So I'll just turn it over to Brooke and her, I guess, Nicole, actually, and let her go ahead and explain the situation.
Councilmember Bergen, this is Brooke Bell. For the record, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. And I just wanted to add a few comments before Nicole speaks on the presentation. Staff, as Councilmember Bergen said, have looked at a couple different alternatives. We also have additional routes that we're considering beyond what you're going to see in this presentation. We do not show them today because we have not done the internal review. I have not seen the routes, and we still need to review them with Laura Perry as well and talk to Councilman Bergen about them. So we can share the history and what we've done to date. We continue to work. We're committed to getting this trail connection as promised to Inspiration, and it does have value to the city as it would connect a large neighborhood into our regional trail system. We're committed to getting that done. My staff tell me they can review the alternative routes with me in September, and we can gain agreement internally and then share that information in October with the public. Nicole?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Ankeny, and I'm the Manager of Planning, Design, and Construction. I think you all did a pretty good summary. So this presentation is going to be a little bit of review. Next slide, please, Lauren. Just to go over a little bit of the project timeline, back in May of 2020, as Councilmember Bergen indicated, pros agreed to install a trail connecting the Inspiration Metro District, which was, of course, formerly referred to as Rocking Horse, to the Piney Creek Trail. At that point in time, the Creekside Eagle Bend board was approving of the project, even though it was crossing their property. That alignment, as you heard, has proposed some, has been a little bit of a challenge since that time. But staff did proceed back in 2020 with the survey and design and engineering. And then as of last year, Creekside Eagle Bend, the board had changed members and they denied our request for an easement through their property. Their two primary concerns were concerns about liability and also unwanted traffic. Because the proposal was to tie into an existing cul-de-sac, they had concerns that the cul-de-sac would turn into an informal trailhead. My staff and I met with the HOA just last November, and their concerns remain the same. We proposed an alternative, as Councilmember Bergen indicated, coming not through the cul-de-sac, but just a little bit north, and I'll show you the map in the next slide, that is through city right-of-way, and they were not supportive of that connection either. They felt that though it did address their concerns of avoiding crossing their property, therefore eliminating the liability issue, they felt that it was still maybe an awkward point to come into the trail system, and they felt that that would not alleviate any of the concerns about traffic. So we are still continuing to explore some other alternatives. Next slide, please. So this map is from last November, which is why you will note in orange, the Metro Districts, the Inspiration Metro Districts trail in orange, showed it connecting to that yellow option A. That, of course, was realigned during the construction process and now goes north-south and connects more into option B, the red one. So option A was, of course, the one that cut across the HOA property that the HOA had real concerns with. Option B, when we presented that to them, they also had some concerns about the issue with traffic. And Lauren, could you go to the next slide, please? So this next map is a little bit of a zoom in so that you can get a closer look at the alignment here. Thank you. So as you can see, the option B would have connected in just a little bit further north than the yellow dashed line. That is a city-owned right-of-way. However, upon further investigation, there would be some serious challenges with that connection. First and foremost, there's a lot of grading issues and drainage issues that we would have to address. There would also be ADA issues connecting through there. So though it looks nice and easy and simple on this map, there are actually some real engineering challenges with that proposed option. Next slide. So as Brooke indicated, the next steps, my staff and I are summarizing viable routes. Once we have that summary pulled together in the next couple of weeks, then we will be taking that back to the HOA along with Councilmember Bergen. And then as we go along, we're happy to provide any updates to City Council on the progress of that. All right. And that concludes my presentation. It's essentially an overview of where we are and the next steps on how we're going to progress. As Brooke mentioned, we are very much committed to making this trail connection. So we're working closely with our consulting engineer, which is Icon Engineering, to evaluate the best and most viable options while taking into account future planning and trail efforts, as well as cost as we look to evaluate and make some solid decisions so we can get this one moving forward. I'm happy to field any questions. Thank you.
I might add one comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
Just, you know, the liability issue and then the issue on perception of increased traffic at that connection point. My husband rides and it actually, maybe this will be part of the discussion, but it should actually reduce traffic because it would not be a termination. It would actually be an entry point. So it should be less traffic because they could probably park at the Red Tail Hawk Park and then continue their ride or wherever they start. So that would be one point. And then a question on the liability. Would the city ever assume liability?
Speaking with our city attorney's office, of course, we would be required to put together easements, and the city would assume a majority of the liability, but because they are a property owner, I think it's challenging to say that the city would be 100% solely liable. So I think that's the concern that the HOA has. just because it still remains on their property. However, the city takes on when we enter into those, when we have those easements that are recorded. Of course, that means the city takes on all of the maintenance and so forth, and in general assumes a substantial amount of the liability. But I think there was still a concern on behalf of the HOA that the city does not have a mechanism to 100% indemnify.
Thank you.
Councilmember Murillo, do you have questions?
So there's going to be an option. I guess, what's the timeline? Because I understand this has taken a long time. I guess I feel some kind of way that like we can just stop like a regional trail from being developed. I get having some concerns, but this feels like it's starting to like balloon and just take longer and longer. So I guess what's the timeline? And I guess if they don't like option C, what are our, what are our next steps then?
That's an excellent question. So once we have the summary pulled together and have an opportunity to analyze the costs and so forth associated with that, we'll have a much better idea on the proposed timeline. It's also a staffing and workload concern, as you can imagine, because we had already had engineered drawings performed for the original alignment. And so we can bring that information forward. As far as timing goes, it is, it's going to be a significant increase in concrete likely. And so we just want to make sure that it's really thoroughly vetted. When it comes to working with the HOA, of course, we always want to have partnerships when we go into these projects. However, if we are not crossing their property, then it does not require a vote from the HOA board. So we're looking at alternatives to the best of our ability to stay within the city right-of-way so that we can try to address their concerns to the extent feasible, but also put us in a better spot where we're responding nicely to their concerns with the liability portion. So I think from my perspective, sticking within the city's right-of-way is going to be the best option forward.
Councilmember Murillo, this is Brooke Bell.
Okay.
And again, we'll have a plan vetted in September and get the necessary internal approvals where we can share a plan in October. And at that point, we should have an idea what the timing is. As Nicole said, this is a much longer trail. We do need to redesign. We'll need to design the new alternative, identify budget, and all that will go into identifying the timing for the project.
Okay. Whenever that happens, can we get a rundown on the cost differential, that option, the original option versus the ultimate option? I mean, including like the time, the original costs for the plant development of the engineering plans and just like the materials costs. I'd like to know that cost differential. And then lastly, how do we, I guess, avoid something like this in the future?
Well, yes, we could get you high-level costs that cost the various costs. Avoiding this in the future, that's hard to say. I would have to talk to legal about debrief on what happened. Would staff move forward based on a verbal agreement, and would a written agreement been more appropriate?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to talk to legal.
Because originally there wasn't an okay.
Yes, there was an okay.
All right, Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina, and thank you for the presentation on this issue. So yeah, I just want to echo the last point that was brought up. I think that whenever we get agreement from folks, we should just move and get that in writing ASAP. Because, option A seems really clearly like the best way to go here. But I understand now that the current HOA board doesn't want us to do that. So option B seems like a decent compromise. And these folks have been waiting for this connection for like over 2 years at this point. I find that incredibly frustrating that we let like an HOA board, delay what is a regional asset for this long. So I would really like us to move this forward as quickly as we can. As Councilmember Bergen mentioned, her spouse uses this, and gosh, y'all, you can look at the satellite images of this area. You can see all of the social trails that are very well worn into the terrain here. So there's high demand for this. So from my perspective, we just need to get it done. So I'm hoping that we can get this into our upcoming budget conversation so that it gets completed.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think they asked the questions I was going to ask too, around what it was with the original cost of the trail, and then the change there in B, because it looks like it's about a 1.5 times larger trail than the original. So yeah, well, thank you again for the presentation, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty, move on to the next agenda item, which is comprehensive park safety and security update.
Good morning, council members. This is Brian Green, acting open space and natural resources manager. How are you all today? And I just want to say for the record that I don't like following Jackie and Nicole. This is like a bad position in the agenda for me because they did such a great job. Anyway, we're going to talk about our comprehensive pro safety and security plan. We've talked about this a couple times before. We just want to bring it back as an update, let you know as we go how we're continuing this process to do what we can to improve safety and security in the parks. So next slide, please. So again, just a review, we've been doing an analysis of the crime data in conjunction with Aurora Police Department and our PROS GIS specialists. So you'll see some data in the next few slides, and that's where that has come from. We started this process over a year ago. We looked at a snapshot in time of the crime that had been reported in the parks and used that as the basis of our to prioritize and focus our efforts. So next slide, please. So this slide represents the locations with the highest crime count, and this is the two separate colors there are the 2 separate years. Now we have a second year of data to look at. Sorry about that. So the 2021 to 2022 data is in light blue, and the 2022 to 2023 data is in dark blue. So along the bottom are the names of the parks that have some crimes reported. This is a number of crimes reported, and you see that we still have a lot of quite a few numbers of crimes reported in these different parks. With Central Rec Center, Delmar Park, Sports Park, some of those leading the way. So this helps us kind of focus our efforts. Next slide, please. This one has a little more detail about the different kinds of crime categories that are occurring in park sites, pro sites. So on the left-hand axis is a percentage. So we took all the crimes, lumped them together, and then what percentage of them are a specific kind of crime. So larceny leads the way, which is actually theft of personal property. So someone, stealing a car, a computer, a wallet, something like that. There are quite another larger percentage is assault and aggravated assault. Obviously, that's a criminal crime between 2 persons or 2 or more persons. Theft, vandalism is on there as well. Disorderly conduct, that's in the middle of the slide there. That's kind of one where someone is refusing to comply with rules, regulations, laws, either within a facility or in a park site. Next slide, please. And these are the sites with the highest crime count split out across the time frame of daytime versus nighttime. So the gray bar is the total crime count that happened in a particular site. Yellow indicates that the crime was committed or reported during the day. Night is at night. So blue is at night. So you can see that the majority of the crimes are occurring or being reported during the day. Del Mar Park shows about an even split. There's, I think there was one where it's Expo Park and Mission Viejo that had a little skew towards nighttime on this. And this is all of those 2 years worth of data lumped together. So just kind of trying to look at more data and make sure that what we're focusing on is the right thing. So next slide, please. We also, in our first analysis, looked at where the crimes are being reported relative to whether a park has a parking lot and or lights or no lights. So the light blue being the 2021 to 2022 data, the darker blue being the 22 to 23 data. And in both years, excuse me, the majority of those crimes that are reported are in parking lot or are in parks or sites with a parking lot with lights. A smaller number are in parks with parking lot and no lights, and then kind of the medium sized bars there are where there's no parking lot at all. So a site where it really doesn't have anything to do with a parking lot. So next slide, please. So this is the first slide where we talk about what we're doing. What are the things that we're doing to try to change that? So solutions that are being realized beginning in 2022 and continuing in 2023. We contracted overnight private security patrol to patrol the higher impacted sites each night. So every night of the week, every night of the year, now we have 2 security patrol within the city, one patrolling sites in the northern half of the city and one patrolling sites in the southern half of the city. We've also procured 2 mobile camera trailers that are tied into the IT system that have security cameras. And then we also hired private security to work at rec centers. And the biggest, probably the biggest, most significant thing is in 2023, we were budgeted to add daytime park ranger patrol throughout the city. So with that effort, there's a total of 5 FTEs, 1 supervisor, and 4 staff rangers to do patrol specific to city urban parks and try to affect these numbers. The recruitment began in January, so it's not like January 1 we had this whole staff up and running. So the first patrols that we were able to realize were about March 15th. We had targeted a date of April 1st to have fully implemented that operation, and we got to it we started it a couple weeks early, so felt pretty good about that. Next slide, please. So specific to the overnight security patrol that was launched on October 14th in 2022, there's 2 security vehicles that look like this, and they patrol those high crime parks from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. every night. So each of those cars has about 14 to 16 parks that they hit within that 8-hour period. So they go back and forth. They try to vary the time that they go to each park, and they vary the amount of time they spend in each one. But most of that is a security presence, and they're observing for criminal activity, and they have direct communication with police dispatch if they see something ongoing, and they can report it and get police support for some sort of criminal activity going on. They report that their patrol activity through a portal that we can see for their reports for every night, what they've experienced. Next slide, please. So the private security in the rec centers, we launched that in 2023. So again, security guards at Southeast, Moorhead, Central, and then the plan was for Del Mar Pool in the summer. The red bullets there have had very large difficulty with staffing those those shifts, and it's become very problematic to the point that now we're seeking a new vendor, and Joe and in cooperation with the police department are looking for a better vendor for that that could be more reliable. And I think Joe might have more information on where they're at with that, but I think they're seeking to launch a new vendor very soon to get a better coverage there.
Right, Brian, just an update. We do have made a temporary contract with Denver Protective Metro Services. It is a company that the city is familiar with. They currently are contracted out with the police department. That started on Monday. We haven't had great success with them, but the city as a whole is looking at a new contract with another provider for long term, and that's still in the purchasing process, going through that agreement procedure. So at this point in time, these locations are being staffed, and since Monday, we haven't had one missed shift. So that we're on the positive upswing.
Great news. Thank you, Joe, for your help in that. I should have gotten that on the slide, but thanks for your help. Next slide, please. So I can speak to the daytime park ranger patrol. Again, that was a 2023 budget SLAR for 5 total persons, 1 supervisor, and 4 rangers, and 2 patrol vehicles. We're still waiting on the 2 patrol vehicles. That's part of the issue. We're using kind of some retained vehicles at the moment, but we didn't let that slow us down. We worked with fleet, got some vehicles that were being retired, and we're using those to make sure we're getting out and patrolling those parks. We're doing park patrol during the day, 7 days a week. Those park rangers are interacting with visitors, educating visitors. They're enforcing rules and regulations. Next slide, please. So this is kind of some data about that daytime park ranger patrol. This was when I did this presentation, or I created this about a couple of weeks ago to get it turned in. We had done 366 patrol shifts in parks since launching on March 15th. That's about, or we had accounted for 671 routine patrols, 147 that really had a focus on an issue. We've contacted 219 illegal camps in parks. This is all specific to parks. So there's other efforts on illegal camping in open space and in, of course, throughout the city. There were 140 enforcement contacts. That means there were 140 instances where the rangers actually, either issued a notice of violation or were enforcing a rule or regulation in parks. There were 49 welfare checks, and I think that's a point that we are proud of, that our rangers are out there interacting with folks and making sure that they're okay. We had one ranger that just a couple of weeks ago, and I need to get the details on. I would like to share that story with you, but she was one of our park ranger new hires in this program, and she was in a park, and I can't remember which one, and she noticed a person that didn't look like they were quite feeling right, and she contacted the gentleman. He couldn't speak English. He was a Spanish speaker only, her being an English speaker only, but she used Google Translate to try to get to communicate with him and figure out if he was feeling well or okay or whatever, and through that process determined that he was in some sort of medical distress, and she dispatched Aurora Fire and paramedics. They transported the person to the hospital. He was having a heart attack. When 2 weeks later, she was in the same park doing his patrol, ran into that gentleman again, and he came over to her and thanked her and told her that he probably wouldn't have made it had she not contacted him and gotten emergency services for him. So we're proud of that. So a total of 102 different park sites have been patrolled in this time period, and I think this program is working well. And that's just a picture of one of our new hired rangers and an illegal camp. Next slide, please. So the mobile security cameras, this has been a long time coming. We worked through purchasing and IT to have these trailers built that have cameras on top and a warning light that allows during the night you can see that, and it is a deterrent to crime. We've got them in a couple of locations where we had some, bad activities going on, and we're able to capture video now during the 24 hours a day. If something were to happen, we'd be able to use that to help identify or just try to figure out what's going on. Currently, they're deployed at Del Mar and Aqua Vista. We're still working the bugs out of them a little bit. IT is working with, so there's a cell phone signal that has to transmit this data to the city server, and then we can look at it. But there's been some issues of trying to get enough upload capacity, and IT's been working with Verizon on the specific equipment that we have in here to try to work out some of the bugs. But so the pros purchased 2 of these mobile camera trailers so that we can move them around when we're having different issues and be able to monitor different sites as needed. The police department actually bought 6 of these. So total in the city, we're working to use about 8 of these different cameras in different locations, 2 focused on parks. Next slide, please. Oh, that might be the last slide. Is that the last slide, Lauren? I think so.
Yes, that is.
Okay, so does anybody have any questions? I went through that a little bit fast, but some of it's old news, some of it's new data, new information. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Murillo.
No questions at this time.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina, and thank you for the presentation, Brian. I did want to ask the slide that you that you showed here, that crimes relative to parking lots and lights. I find that information really interesting and a little concerning because everything that I have read and everything that we've been told and that we were told by APD as well is that lighting helps deter crime. So maybe it's just maybe me misreading the data here, but it seems that we're having more issues in lots with lights than rather than those that don't have lights.
Yeah,
And I guess I want to know, like, is the data being skewed just because like the parks that have lights are much larger, so there are more people, so there's more of a chance of incidences? Are we really looking basically at like a use graph here, not so much a, lights versus not lights and that efficacy?
I definitely think you are onto something there, and that's kind of why we continue to look at this data for another year. When we first looked at this data a year ago, that was kind of what we're seeing. So I don't think you can use this specific slide to go, well, we have to do one thing or another.
Right.
It just is interesting in the way you mentioned that there's a huge skew towards where there is a parking lot and it has lights. We have a lot of crime occurring. There is some anecdotal information that a lot of this crime that is about maybe larceny and assault and things is where people are coming together. And at night, when people are coming together, they're coming together usually where there's a parking lot where they can, it's a meeting point, I think. And that's kind of what we're looking at here, is that maybe it almost kind of it does attract attention, but they are the bigger parks, right? They are the bigger giant parking lots. It's Sports Park, it's Del Mar, it's Utah. I mean, places where there are parking lots, they generally are the bigger parks. So yeah, I'm not sure that we can use this slide and this data to really determine any real action, but it does make you pause when someone says, well, we just need to light everything. Well, I don't know, do we? We're not sure. I don't know if this is the end of the research here. This is just kind of.
Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting data point here, at least the way it's presented. And then I wanted to ask about Expo. Sorry, what were the other ones? Del Mar and Mission Viejo. Since those, I think, are the 3, right? I'm sorry, I'm trying to look on my side screen here, but it's all very small, that actually have more nighttime issues than daytime issues. And what are some of the things that y'all are considering for that specifically? Is it like some of what we just touched on, where people are just gathering there at night?
Yeah, I'm not real sure. I'd have to dig into the data a little more, but those are parks that are on our overnight security patrol plan and also our ones that we focus on during the day. So we're focusing our efforts there. And really, when you look at that, I mean, the number of data points is really small, so it's pretty easy for it to leapfrog one way or the other, day and night, whether it's 6 and 9, or whether it's 4 and 7. It's a difference of 3. So I think the small number of crimes actually occurring in parks is significant to discuss as well. That I think the number is it on that slide, or I thought it was on one of these slides, that just the overall percentage of crimes committed in Aurora that are actually committed in association or with parks is less than 1%. So we're spending a big effort and a lot of dollars and a lot of effort to try to focus on crimes that are occurring in parks, because that's where people want to feel safe, right? We want to make sure we're focusing on that. So it is quite a bit of an effort pointed at a tiny little percentage of overall crime in Aurora, but it's where we want people to feel safe and secure. So that's why some of these numbers, the bars look really big and you're like, oh my gosh, but it's a really small number, and it could flip-flop really easily over the course and this is 2 years of data. So
Yep. And that was actually one of the last things that I wanted to bring up, was that I think that contextualizing all this information is important, because I don't want any of our residents who are watching this to be like, oh my God, our parks are unsafe.
Yeah.
Like, this is, as you mentioned already, less than 1% of all of the issues that happen in the city of Aurora. So they're very safe. And, I just felt the need to ask about the 3 that seem to have higher or comparable nighttime incidences, just to see, is there something that maybe we're considering there, or is this just, I guess a symptom of the overall issues in, some of these areas, right? Because, when I've looked at our socioeconomic vulnerability index and our crime map, it's the same map pretty much. So are these just areas where there's some other needs that we can meet in other ways, as opposed to, reacting to it, right? So
I agree.
Anywho, all right. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I found this to be very interesting. And I'm glad that the ranger patrols are working. So
yes, thank you.
Councilmember Bergen, you have any questions?
No, I also found it fascinating. I had some issues in some parks brought by constituents, and this actually put it in perspective, because they thought there was much more activity happening at night in their park than what the data showed. I do think the cameras are a really good investment. I think that they do deter some criminal behavior. So thank you.
And I think I could respond just one thing to Councilmember Bergen. And I just think that also when people complain, sometimes they're complaining about activity in the park, which isn't necessarily crime. And so this is actually data that's, crimes, a criminal act was reported to the police department. I just want to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting that this is activity in parks, because sometimes there is activity that people perceive as crime.
Very good. Yeah, that's a good point, because I think some of the activity is not good activity.
Right.
We would not consider it good behavior, but it doesn't rise to the level of crime. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have kind of one question. It's kind of out there, but have you noticed any influx of people driving like ATVs or trucks or cars on the parks?
More on trails and open space. We get those kinds of complaints, probably daily. We do a lot of focus patrols trying to try to curb that, but we really our jurisdiction and our authority is pretty limited. We can contact people and enforce park rules and regulations. We can't pursue people. We can't you can't follow somebody with an ATV into the neighborhood and try to find where they go and knock on their door and do those kinds of things. So we do have some limited ability, but what we do is try to be there. We try to take the information that people are reporting to us and create a focus patrol whereby we try to hit that same time frame and maybe try to patrol that trail from the 2 directions at once and try to at least contact people. Typically, they know they're doing something that's against the rule. It's not that they don't know that it's wrong. But we have all manners of vehicles that are reported to us. We contacted a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old together on a go-kart in the middle of a trail, and no parent, anywhere around. So yeah, and these are things that happen all the time. So yes, please, we are seeing that in different places. Yes.
Well, thank you again for the presentation and the information, and keep doing what you do. Appreciate it. All right, next on the agenda, we've got, I think our last presentation, which is the 4D Recreation Fund and Open Space and Natural Resources.
Thank you, council members. This is Brooke Bell for the record, Director of Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. I believe, Laura, are you going to pull the presentation up?
I am. Yes, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you very much for your assistance.
Yes, I'll need to just give presenter capability, or Adrian, if you beat me to it. That is great as well, Adrian Botham.
Okay. Is it loaded? Can everyone see that?
Yes, it needs to be in presentation mode.
Yes.
So today I will be speaking primarily on the financial sustainability of the Recreation Fund, and we'll also share information regarding the open space and natural resources operations. PROS undertook work during the first half of 2023 to develop a cost recovery model, and if implemented, it is designed to support the long-term financial health of the Recreation Fund. Next slide, please. During this presentation, I'll review the high-level financial information related to pre- and post-pandemic recreation operations and identify additional ongoing and emerging financial challenges. As background, the Recreation Fund provides the financial support for all associated recreation staffing, recreation centers, operations and programming, and special events. The Recreation Fund revenues are primarily generated from fees for services, and the fund also receives a transfer in from the general fund. That's known as the general fund subsidy. Historically, the general fund subsidy increases with changes in wages and utilities. Prior to 2020, the subsidy was equivalent to approximately 45% of the Recreation Fund's operating budget. The general fund subsidy is now closer to 61% of the Recreation Fund operating budget. Prior to COVID, you can see on this slide, the Recreation Fund was financially strong, salaries and staffing levels and expenses were stable, and program and center attendance was strong. As you can see on the slide, the gray portion of the bars represent the general fund subsidy, and the revenues are represented by the blue portion of the bar, and expenses are shown by the red line. Since the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the Recreation Fund remains financially challenged. The post-pandemic reality is lower program registrations. Revenues are down $3 million compared to 2019. And while the program participation lags pre-pandemic levels, program demand is increasing. So that's a positive. Next slide. This chart shows a comparison of monthly revenues over 3 key years. In 2019, the year before the pandemic, that is the green line, and then 2022, 3 years post-pandemic, that is the 2022, 3 years post-pandemic, and then 2023 with the Southeast Recreation Center opening in January. So the blue line is 2023, the red line is 2022 post-pandemic, and the green line is pre-pandemic. 2019 revenues, let's see, in 2019, Central Recreation Center opened in early June. So we saw a big jump in revenues in 2019, the green line, in June, May. The sports park was fully booked. Recreation programs were well attended through 2019. The Central Recreation Center was expected to generate revenues offsetting 75% of their expenses, and that was accomplished. In March of 2020, all recreation programming were closed. By July of 2020, in that same year, recreation centers and pools were reopened, so we saw a boost. And that was accomplished when most Denver metropolitan cities, or Denver accomplished the most, more than most Denver metro cities, including Denver, were unable to achieve. If you fast forward to 2023, the blue line, the Southeast Recreation Center, opens in January. So we see a boost, and we're bringing in revenues that are about 150 to 200,000 a month. The Southeast Recreation Center is also expected to generate revenues offsetting 75% of their expenses. We are still short with regard to the Southeast Recreation Center revenues. They're short, they're not meeting expectations, but it is growing. And that's not unusual for a new recreation center. The overarching concern in the recreation fund revenue, for the recreation fund revenues, is that we're not exceeding our pre-pandemic levels, considering that we have new recreation centers operating. Next slide. Additionally, new and ongoing challenges are driving recreation fund expenses higher. These include costs for armed security guards in our facility. Staff and patrons have experienced an increase in challenging behaviors that include patrons bringing weapons into facilities, an increase in thefts, an increase in patron to patron and patron to employee altercations, and criminal activity in the parking lot. Many of the recreation facilities are older and require capital repair and amenity replacements. Newer facilities will face capital equipment replacements in the coming years as well. Inflation and employee recruitment and retention continues to be a challenge. Next slide. The Recreation Fund requires changes to remain financially sustainable without significant growth and support from the general fund subsidy. So the actions that we are taking include increased use of professional services agreements, eliminating programs better served by the private sector, transitioning some services to contracts, and staff work with consultants to develop, a cost recovery methodology that we're sharing with you today and for future city council consideration. Today, we're introducing the cost recovery model. Staff will also bring back specific fee recommendations to the city council during the spring workshop, if you so direct. Next slide. So the cost recovery model, if you look at this, PRO staff worked with a consultant, 110%, consulting is the name of the company, 110%, that has worked with hundreds of parks and recreation organizations across North America, to find solutions for ensured long-term financial health in their systems. The focus of the work was to build a thoughtful financial strategy that incorporates a cost recovery model and uses data to inform the decision making. The cost recovery goals that you see here today are unique to the city of Aurora. The cost recovery goals and categories may be refined as PROS builds specific fee recommendations and assesses the fee and impacts on the recreation funds and our users. The chart you see here shows the basic assumptions that guide the cost recovery model and goals. Programs and uses are categorized along a continuum. That's the purple stripe across the arrow across the slide. The vertical scale on the left goes from high subsidy, low cost recovery at the bottom to low subsidy, high cost recovery at the top. The scale across the bottom goes from high subsidy, the scale across the bottom goes from programs that are for the common good, that are low cost recovery, such as parks, playgrounds, and outdoor courts, and then goes to individual use, which is individual benefit with a higher cost recovery. And then along the blue stripe, you see different program, like type offerings and their specific goals for cost recovery. Okay, as you move along that continuum, the purple stripe, beginners and intermediate level activities would include swim lessons. That's primarily around 25 to 50% cost recovery. The fourth item up on the purple stripe. The expectation is that every child should know how to swim, and so the cost recovery is lower to limit the barrier to swim lesson access. Yet there is still a cost for the program. However, as you move up the scale to private and semi-private categories that include, let's say, private swim lessons for an individual's stroke development, there would be higher cost recovery expectations for that individual service. Another example are individual rentals, party rooms, for profit businesses like the sports park. Businesses that use sports fields should pay more for the exclusive use of those sports fields. People benefiting from the rental for a party room should pay more for those amenities. The next slide, please. So this is the revenue share based on those different cost recovery categories from the previous slide. The pie chart on the left shows the revenue shares. The categories with the highest revenue share will be areas of focus for the recreation team. For example, facility admissions represent 30% of the recreation fund revenues and admission fees, and those have not changed since the entry fees have not changed since 2017. Field rentals are 20% of the recreation fund revenues. And again, our pricing requires more work because of the increased maintenance costs and supplies, the inflation to maintain the fields. And so we want to look at that with regard to adjusting field rental rates. There's also opportunities to add more aquatic programming and increase rental fees as well. Next slide. This is the cost recovery model for open space and natural resources. This model it's the same model. The categories are a little different. There are fewer of them. And also we recognize that open space and natural resources functions are supported by multiple funds. So it's not a standalone fund. They receive revenue support from the general fund and also primarily the open space fund. Areas of focus for So for the common good, again, program use for the common good have low cost recovery goals. This would be Plains Conservation Center, Morrison Nature Center. Another example would be Trick or Treat Trail. Programs that are for use for the individual benefit would include the for-profit business use, the higher cost recovery expectation. That would be Aurora Reservoir, entry fees, and boat inspections, for example. Next slide. So areas of focus for the open space and natural resource team. We have shown through the fee effort for 2023, we have asked for entry fees to increase at the Aurora Reservoir for weekdays. So currently we use dynamic pricing that was initiated in 2022, and summer weekends and holidays we charge $15 per vehicle, and on weekdays we charge $10. In 2024 we're proposing to increase the per vehicle fee to $15 for all days of the week during the 14 weeks between Memorial Day and Labor Day. Boat rental inspection fees, we're also expecting to increase that fee to offset our costs as well. We do ongoing financial reviews of the Aurora Reservoir to monitor our costs and our revenues. Next slide. So next steps, today we've introduced the cost recovery model at a very high level. Our next steps are to increase our financial reporting and review, gain more discipline in that between the teams. Refine the model, the cost recovery model, and tie it to specific financial goals and fee increases. And then we would like to bring that back and share that information with City Council at the spring workshop. And we also will establish those interim financial goals prior to the spring workshop to start testing some of those out. I know there's a lot here. We're open to discussion and your thoughts and feedback.
Thank you, Brooke, for the presentation. Councilmember Murillo.
No questions, but again, I'm happy to see that we're being, responding at least in a timely sense to kind of trying to do the cost recovery so it doesn't continue to be a larger gap. I mean, I was surprised by going through the presentation at what that was looking like, but thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
You, Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina, and thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I'm also, I understand our need to, recover some costs here. I just want to make sure that as we are going through this, we're doing it in a way that's not going to discourage the use of our facilities, especially by, under-resourced communities. This is one of, a big believer in being proactive as opposed to reactive. And I think that, giving folks opportunities to generate positive social capital, to build skills, and to frankly just have fun and be kids and recreate is important. So as long as we're able to maintain that while, finding ways where it makes sense to improve our cost recovery metrics, I'm all for it. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Bergen.
Yeah, I stayed on because I was very interested in this, and I think, there are opportunities for us to increase some of the fees, again, being sensitive to other populations and so forth. Two things, and I brought this up years ago, and maybe I missed it during your presentation. On the entry fees, I had always thought we should be increasing non-resident fees. I mean, because this is an amenity that, basically taxpayers pay for our residents. So did you address the non-resident fee? I can't remember.
Oh, I'm going to ask Joe Sack that question. Joe,
okay, maybe just something to look into.
Yeah, we will look into that. I'm just wondering if Joe is still on the line and he might have insight on, do we have a non-residential fee?
We do. And, but our non-resident participation is really, really low. It's it's not probably a way for us to look at making a large investment or increases in. It would probably discourage those non-residents. A larger fee increase would discourage those non-residents. And it wouldn't be a way for us to balance the rec fund by non-resident usage just because there's just not enough there.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not like we're seeing so many non-residents that our own residents are not able to use facilities.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
My second question is, have we considered, because I think it would work in the Southeast Rec Center, is to have a concession near like a Jamba Juice where we would charge them for being in our rec center. Is that a consideration at all? Or would that even make us money?
Yeah, we could look into it. I don't have a sense of whether it would make money or not. Can we have, quite honestly, our experience with concessions on a very large scale at the sports park, it was break even or actually losing money. And so that is a reason why we have a professional services agreement for those concessions now. With regard to monetizing the field house and activating that space, that's another area that we need to focus on. Concessions could be considered, in not partnership, but concessions might align well as we get more activity in the field house. We can look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. A couple questions I have. But you, Mr. Bergen? All right.
You broke up a little bit there, Ruben.
Okay, I was just making sure somebody else was interjecting. Yeah, just a couple of questions on the programs. Have we done any evaluation on programs that we know that we're not generating kind of revenue? And have we done some, informational sessions in the community around what is things that community wants so that we can maybe start to address those as opposed to programs that we're not getting the numbers?
So I do believe there's more work we could do with regard to the community and programming, because we are finishing up on the PROS master plan, but it is not, the PROS master plan is at a level that's much higher than what you would want. The engagement, the public engagement associated with the PROS master plan is fairly high level, and it didn't go down to that particular detail. And so we could do more work around engaging the public. We also have, a sense of, we do have programs that have significant wait lists, right? And so again, aquatics is in high demand. Our challenge there is staffing, the resources to meet the demand. There's a lot of work around that. So we do have a sense of some programs based on wait lists where we can focus attention.
Yeah, the other question I have, this has been a problem, I think, even when I started working in there, which is the janitorial service.
Mm-hmm.
We had issues, from way back 2007. Is there have you looked at having that internal?
So
to hiring
internal
janitorial service in-house?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
But
so we've done both. We had it contract, and then we've had it internal, and we do have a lot of internal staff focused on it now, and we also have a contract, so it's a combination of. It still remains a challenge, and so we have several. We're expecting several employees will be retiring here later in the year, and if they do that, we are looking at having a combination, having more contract services with a different vendor. We're looking at a different vendor during the nighttime hours where you can do the deep cleaning, and then having day porters, which would be full-time staff. So we're just trying to refine the combination of the two services to meet the needs. It is a challenge. It really is a challenge for us.
And my last question just is around hiring in general, because I know that's an issue, in all departments. Have we done any robust opportunities of looking at hiring locally, and how many people at our rec centers actually come from those communities? Just because, having run the rec centers before, and certainly at Moorhead stuff, is, I found that you get a little more loyalty if it's community members that are there. And I'm sure there are probably, even patrons currently that may be potential, people to hire if given the opportunity, if we build those relationships with people. Because I know not just here at the city, but also at the YMCA, where I worked at for 25 years, is that, building those relationships at front desk and stuff and talking to people and needs is, there are potential people, I think, that we may be bypassing. And if we can create an opportunity for that, I think that you'll have the sustainability, and you'll have, I think, better employees because they're invested, because it's part of their community.
I think it's a great comment. And just yesterday, Laura Perry and I were meeting with the golf team, the golf employees from Aurora Hills Golf Course. And we asked them what brought them here, and it was amazing how many had friends or were recruited by staff on site. and live in the neighborhood. And so it matches the model you're describing, and they're long-term employees that enjoy what they're doing. So I do believe you have a great idea there.
But let me know if I can assist in any way, because I'm more than happy to do that, you know, having come from this area too. So I have a little bit more bias, so to speak, on that, but I certainly want to make sure that you guys are viable and moving in a positive direction, but also being inclusive of the community we serve and getting as many of those people excited, because to me, that's the biggest advertisement for us is in our facilities. If we have people locally that are hired and working and go out in their community every day, there's that sense of pride and also, you know, the opportunity to work for the city. So
Thank you.
thank you again for the presentations and keep doing what you do. We appreciate it.
You're
And
welcome.
if I can chime in, Chair Medina, we were hoping for council's endorsement here to bring this forward to study session. Our goal is to have an informational presentation to the full council, seek council's endorsement to move forward with this work. So thank you to the policy committee for your endorsement here. Our next step would be the full council. And then, as Brooke said, come back in incremental steps as we move forward with applying the cost recovery model framework, and then get more micro in terms of programs and how we operationalize the framework that we've started on. So with that, Councilmember Medina, are there any concerns if we move forward to study session?
Any from the committee members?
For me.
Sounds good with me.
And I support moving forward.
So do I. So
Great.
there you go.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bergen. All right, so now we've got down to the number 5, miscellaneous matters for consideration.
Chair Medina?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Hi. There are several questions from the last meeting that I owe council members responses on. Councilmember Marcano had some questions around the medians and also additional costs for centers, as you did as well. And I think Councilmember Murillo had questions about medians in Ward 1. And so my intent is to draft a memo to respond to those items at a high level, and I will have those to you within the next 2 weeks, so you have those ahead of the fall workshop.
Okay, thank you. Any others? All right, topics for next month's meeting.
I do not have topics as yet, but I will send you some shortly.
Okay. And with that, if there's no other questions or concerns, we'll adjourn.
Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Take care.
Right on time.
For that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.